I was still in my paramedic uniform when I pushed through the doors of the banquet hall, my boots squeaking on the polished floor. The radio clipped my shoulder, still crackling faintly, even though I'd switched it off 20 minutes ago out of habit. There was vomit on my sleeve that I hadn't had time to notice until right then, and a smear of someone else's blood-dried brown along the side of my left hand. The room smelled like white lilies and catered salmon, and underneath that, faintly, like the inside of an ambulance, which I realized was just me. The coordinator at the door looked at me the way people look at something they don't know how to name. Not quite pity. Something closer to dread. She didn't say anything. She just glanced toward the ballroom doors and then quickly away, like she'd been told not to look at me directly. I knew before I even pushed the door open. I knew the way you know a patient's gone, before the monitor flatlines, some shift in the air that arrives a half second ahead of the fact. The room was full. White folding chairs, a string quartet, packing up their instruments like the performance was already over, and right at the front under an arch wrapped in eucalyptus and white ranunculus, the exact flowers I'd shown my sister a photo of 11 months ago, and said, This is what I want, stood my fiancé. Beside him, in a dress that fit her like it had been made for her body and not borrowed, stood my best friend. Holding my flowers. Wearing my color. Married by the look of the efficient closing his binder to my Marcus. His mother, Patricia, was the one who reached me first. She crossed the room with her chin up and her heels clicking against the hardwood like punctuation, and when she got close enough, she didn't even bother lowering her voice. "You're late, Sienna," she said. "You're 3 hours late. What did you expect?" I turned to leave. My legs were already moving before my brain caught up, the kind of automatic retreat your body does when staying upright is the only goal left. I made it 4 steps toward the exit, and then I saw him in the doorway. But to understand why a man I had never met standing in a hotel doorway in Mississauga stopped me cold, you have to go back. Back to before any of this. Back to when none of it had cracked yet. My name is Sienna Okuosa. I'm 29. I'm a primary care paramedic with Peel Region Paramedic Services. And I grew up in Brampton, Ontario, in a townhouse my parents bought the year they immigrated from Lagos. The kind of house where the basement was always half-finished and always would be because there was always something more urgent to spend the money on. My mom worked nights at a long-term care facility for almost 20 years. My dad drove for a trucking company out of an industrial park near the airport. I was the first person in my family born in Canada, and I think that fact alone shaped almost everything else about me. I grew up watching 2 people work themselves down to the bone for a life they'd chosen on purpose, and somewhere around age 14, I decided I wanted a job where the stakes were real, not glamorous, real. I got my paramedic diploma from Humber, did my placements, and by 23 I was working 12-hour shifts out of a station off Steeles Avenue, the kind of job where you learn within your first month that the human body is both far more fragile and far more resilient than anyone tells you. I'm not saying that to sound noble. I'm saying it because by the time I was 29, that work had become the actual architecture of who I was. Everything else in my life got built around the shape of my shift schedule. It was also, if I'm honest, the thing that quietly ended 2 relationships before Marcus. I met Marcus Albrecht at a friend's housewarming in Streetsville 3 years ago. He worked in commercial insurance underwriting, which sounds boring until you actually talk to him about it, because he had this way of explaining risk and probability that made it sound almost philosophical. He was tall, soft-spoken, drove a sensible Honda CR-V, and the first thing he ever did for me was notice I'd been standing near the drink table for 20 minutes without actually getting a drink, and just quietly handed me a ginger ale because he'd heard me say earlier, I don't really drink on call days. Small thing. I thought about it for a week. We dated for 10 months before he asked me to move into his place in Erin Mills. We split, rent down the middle, 50-50 on groceries, and he never once made a comment about my schedule the way the guy before him used to, the one who called me married to my pager. Marcus would text things like proud of you for getting through that one and mean it, I think. At parties, he'd introduce me as my fiancé. She saves people for a living, and there was real warmth in it. Not performance. His mother was a different story from the very first dinner. Patricia Albrecht was 63, recently retired from 31 years teaching high school English in Oakville, and had very specific opinions about what kind of woman belonged in her family. My job schedule, my apartment. The fact that I sometimes worked Christmas Eve, the fact that my parents were Nigerian and she could never quite place the accent, dear. Where exactly is that from again? Every single time, as if she hadn't asked 4 times already. The first dinner at her house, she looked across the table at my hands, calloused from years of compressions and lifting stretchers, and said, "Goodness, those aren't the hands of a woman who'll have time for a proper home." I laughed because I assumed it was a joke. It was not a joke. Marcus always waved it off. "She's old school," he'd say. "She does that to everyone." But she didn't do it to Vivian. Vivian Castellanos had been my best friend since our first year at Humber, where we'd ended up in the same residence and somehow never stopped being roommates in spirit even after we both moved out. She'd switched into hospitality management halfway through and now managed events for a hotel chain downtown, the kind of job that came with a closet full of beautiful, effortless outfits and an easy charm that made strangers warm to her in about 90 seconds. She was at my parents' Christmas dinners. She was the one who drove me to the hospital the night my dad had his minor heart scare 2 years ago, and sat with me in the waiting room until 4 a.m. I loved her like a sister. I told people that constantly. Vivian and Marcus met through me, obviously. The 3 of us out at the same patios all summer. The same Raptors games on the big screen, at the sports bar near my work. I never thought twice about it. Looking back now, I can list the moments I missed with an almost embarrassing clarity. The way she'd laugh a beat too long at things he said that weren't that funny. The way he started texting her directly to check in since you're always on shifts, as if she were the emergency contact instead of just a friend. The way Patricia's whole face would change when Vivian walked into a room, calling her such a natural, so easy to talk to, in a tone that made the comparison to me obvious without ever naming it. Marcus proposed on a Tuesday in our kitchen, in Erin Mills, no production, just him, a small ring box, and the question. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We called my parents first, then his. My mom cried on the phone in a way I'd only heard once before, the day I graduated. We set the date for the following September, an outdoor ceremony at a banquet hall just off the Mississauga waterfront. Simple, 60 guests, dinner after. Vivian was my maid of honor. She came dress shopping with me at a bridal boutique on Queen Street in Toronto, and cried in the dressing room when I came out in the one I picked, an ivory slip dress. $610 after the bridal alterations, money I'd been setting aside in a separate savings account since the engagement because I knew exactly what I made and exactly what I could afford. She planned my bachelorette at a wine bar in Port Credit. She listened to 4 months of venue logistics without complaint. She was perfect. She was present. I should have understood that being someone's perfect, present best friend and quietly building a life inside the empty spaces of their relationship are not mutually exclusive things. I just didn't. Not then. 11 days before the wedding, I got called in on a pediatric arrest. A 7-year-old boy named Caleb had gone into anaphylaxis at a birthday party, an allergy nobody had caught yet because it was a new reaction, the kind that comes out of nowhere the first time exposure crosses some threshold his body had finally had enough of. By the time we got the call, he was in respiratory distress, airway closing, and the 12 minutes between dispatch and the hospital bay doors were some of the longest of my career. We got him there breathing. He spent 4 days in the ICU. I checked on him twice on my own time, off the clock, because that's a thing I do, and I'm not going to apologize for it. The morning of the wedding, I was scheduled to come off a night shift at 7 a.m.'s, ceremony at 1 p.m. Plenty of buffer, or so I told Marcus, and so I genuinely believed. At 6:40 a.m., right at shift change, we got flagged for a multi-vehicle collision on the 401 near the Erin Mills Parkway exit. 3 cars, one of them rolled. I called Marcus from the scene, told him I might be cutting it close. Please, just hold the start time if I'm not there exactly at 1. He said, "Don't worry about it, just get here when you can." And something in his voice was too easy, too smooth. In a way I clocked, and then immediately talked myself out of clocking. Because who has the bandwidth to be suspicious of their fiancé while doing chest compressions on a stranger on the shoulder of a highway? We got everyone stabilized and transported by 11:15. I should have had 2 hours. Then my supervisor pulled me aside for a debrief that couldn't wait, a mandatory critical incident review because of the severity of the call. 45 minutes. I couldn't skip no matter how many times I checked my phone. By the time I peeled off my gloves for the last time and grabbed my bag from my locker, it was 12:50. I texted Marcus, running late, debrief ran long, leaving now, please wait, I love you, I'm coming. I called, it rang through to voicemail, I called again. Same. The drive from the station to the Mississauga waterfront should take 25 minutes. With lakeshore traffic and a stalled streetcar crossing near Port Credit, it took 55. I pulled into the hotel parking lot at 1:58. Parked crooked across 2 spots because I genuinely could not make myself care, and ran through those doors still in uniform, my radio still clipped to my shoulder out of habit. And that's when the coordinator gave me that look. And that's when I walked into the ballroom and watched the back of a wedding that wasn't supposed to be happening yet. Except it turns out it had started at 1:15, not 1:30, moved up 45 minutes, because the officiant had another booking. My mother told me afterward, her voice shaking, that's what Patricia told everyone. It had ended at 1:42, and there was Vivian, in white, holding my ranunculus. I stood there in that ballroom with the string quartet still half-packed, and the smell of catered salmon thick in the air, and someone, somewhere near the back, actually laughed. A short, nervous bark of a sound I will never not remember. Patricia reached me first, smiling the way you smile when you've been waiting years for permission to say something cruel out loud. "You're late, Sienna. You're 3 hours late. What did you expect?" I turned toward the exit. That's when I saw him in the doorway. He was a stocky man in his 50s, wearing a gray suit that had clearly been bought for occasions, not for comfort, a lanyard with a Peel Regional Police badge clipped to his breast pocket, and a leather folio tucked under one arm that looked heavier than its size suggested. He wasn't looking around the room the way a confused guest would. He was looking directly at me, and the expression on his face wasn't awkwardness or apology. It was recognition. "Sienna Okwuosa?" he said. My mouth had gone completely dry. Behind me, I could hear Patricia still talking, but her voice had gone soft and distant, like a television in another room. "Yes," I managed. "That's me. Detective Sergeant Aaron Chowdhury, Peel Regional Police, Financial Crimes Unit," he said. "I've been trying to reach you for 4 days. I left 2 messages at your station, and 1 with HR at Peel Paramedic Services." His eyes moved past me, briefly, to the room I'd just stumbled out of, and something tightened behind them. "I'm going to need a few minutes of your time." Patricia materialized at my elbow the way she always seemed to, that same smile fixed and brittle now. "This is a private family event," she said. "She's not family. Not anymore." The detective looked at her the way you look at a red light you have no intention of stopping for. "Ma'am, I wasn't speaking to you." He held the side door open for me, the one that led to the hotel's outdoor terrace overlooking the lake, and I walked through it because my legs were the only part of me still taking instructions. We stood out there, the September wind coming hard off Lake Ontario, my radio still clipped uselessly to my shoulder, and Detective Chowdhury opened the folio. "Mrs. Oquiosas, how much do you know about Marcus Albrecht's financial history?" I shook my head slowly. "He's in insurance underwriting. We split rent, groceries, 50-50. I never had a reason to dig into his finances." "Did you know he was named in a civil suit in the Ontario Superior Court 18 months ago, related to a private lending arrangement that went bad?" "No." "Did you know there's a default judgment against him for $91,000 from a numbered company that folded in 2024? My knees actually went, just for a second, a real physical buckle that the cold terrace railing caught. "No," I said again, quieter. He laid the documents out on the little patio table between us with the kind of practiced calm I recognized from my own job, the calm you build, doing something terrible often enough that your hands stop shaking, even when your stomach doesn't. Court filings. Bank statements. A numbered company, 2841936 Ontario Inc., operating as Castellanos and Albrecht Consulting. Castellanos, Vivian's last name. This numbered company was incorporated 16 months ago, Chowdhury said, and was funded primarily through a series of e-transfers and wire deposits from a joint TFSA and a linked Cheekwing account opened in your name and Mr. Albrecht's at a CIBC branch on Dundas Street. He paused, watching me. "Miss Okwuosa, do you recall signing any joint banking documents with Mr. Albrecht in the last year?" I opened my mouth, closed it. There had been a Saturday morning 8 months ago, a thick stack of paperwork at the bank, Marcus saying it was just consolidating accounts for the mortgage pre-approval we were starting to talk about, putting a pen in my hand while I was running on 4 hours of sleep after a night shift, and I'd signed it because I trusted him, because trusting him had never once felt like a risk before that morning. "I think I did," I whispered. "That account funneled approximately $74,000 into the numbered company over 11 months, he said. "Your name is on it, which is exactly why we've been trying to reach you, to determine whether you were a participant in this or a victim of it." "Victim," I said, and my voice came out flatter than I expected. "Definitely a victim." "That's what I suspected," he said, not unkindly. "I'll need a formal statement from you, but I want you to know the reason I'm here today." Mr. Albrecht and Ms. Castellanos were scheduled to be served with civil subpoenas this afternoon related to the fraud investigation. We coordinated with the venue to do it here, since this was the confirmed location we had on file for both of them. I looked back through the glass doors at the ballroom. Marcus was in there. Vivian was in there. Patricia was in there, gloating. And they were all about to find out what I'd just found out. I straightened up. I unclipped the radio from my shoulder and set it down on the patio table, deliberately, like I was setting down something I no longer needed to be carrying. "Detective Chowdhury," I said, "can I walk back in there with you?" He studied me for a second. "You can stand in the doorway. Don't say anything until I'm done." That was fine. I didn't need to say a single word. We went back inside together, and the room went quiet the instant the door opened, not a polite hush, but a held breath one. My mother's hand dropped from her mouth. My older sister, a Daisy, who'd flown in from Calgary 3 days earlier, went rigid in her seat. Marcus, who'd been standing near the cake table with Vivian's hand in his, looked up, saw the badge clipped to Chowdhury's pocket, and the color drained out of his face fast enough that I actually, in some clinical back corner of my brain, thought, that's a vasovagal response. He might actually faint. Vivian saw it a half-second later. I watched her eyes move from me to the detective, to the folio under his arm, and I watched the exact moment she understood. Her hand tightened on Chris's. He pulled his away first. Patricia stepped forward, the only person in the room who still looked composed. "Who exactly are you?" "Detective Sergeant Aaron Chowdhury, Peel Regional Police." He drew the first document from the folio. "I have civil subpoenas for Marcus Albrecht and Vivian Castellanos in connection with an ongoing fraud investigation involving 284 Wine36, Ontario, Inc." He held it out. "Mr. Albrecht." Marcus didn't move for a second. He was looking at me, and his face had collapsed into an expression I'd genuinely never seen on him. Not guilt exactly, more like a man recalculating odds he'd been sure of a moment ago and realizing he'd gotten the math wrong somewhere. "You need to take this, sir," Chowdhury said, perfectly pleasant. Marcus took it. His hand was shaking. "Mrs. Castellanos." Vivian, still in white, still holding my ranunculus, took the subpoena and it slipped right out of her fingers onto the hardwood. She had to crouch down in her wedding dress to pick it back up, and when she stood again, her face had gone a deep, blotchy red. Somewhere to my left, Patricia made a small strangled sound. My sister, in the silence that followed, said clearly from the back row, "Well, there it is then." I almost laughed. I didn't, but it was close. Chowdhury turned to me, gave a small nod, and pressed a card into my hand. "My office will follow up Monday. You'll want a lawyer present." "I'll have one," I said. He left. I stood there in my uniform, vomit dried on my sleeve, blood smudged on my hand, and I looked at Marcus Albrecht, the man who'd moved the ceremony 45 minutes earlier, knowing exactly what that would cost me, who'd signed my name onto documents I never read closely enough, who'd built a numbered company with my best friend using money I'd earned doing 12-hour shifts on the 401 in February. "I hope it was worth it," I said. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked to my mother, who put her arms around me immediately, and I let her hold me for exactly as long as I needed, which turned out to be about 10 seconds. Then I stepped back, squeezed her hand, and said, "I'm okay. Let's go." My sister grabbed her bag and fell in behind us. Two of my actual friends from the guest list, the ones who'd come for me specifically, peeled off from their tables and followed too. We walked out of that ballroom together, and the door closed behind us, and that was the last time I was ever in the same room as Marcus Albrecht. The weeks after weren't clean. I hired a lawyer named Priscilla Nwachukwu out of a family and civil litigation firm in Mississauga, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who'd clearly seen every version of this story and had stopped being surprised by any of them. She made 3 calls in the first 48 hours, one to CIBC to have my name formally separated from the joint account and to flag it for the active fraud file, one to the Crown's office to confirm my status as a victim, not a party, in the criminal matter, one to Marcus's lawyer, putting him on notice that I'd be pursuing recovery of my contributed funds with documentation going back 16 months. His lawyer called back inside of 5 hours, which Priscilla told me, with a thin little smile, was the fastest she'd seen in 14 years of practice. The civil case took 6 months. I'm not going to walk through every motion, because living it once was enough. What matters is that by the end, I'd recovered $52,000 of the $74,000. Not all of it, enough to matter. The numbered company collapsed, predictably, once the investors who'd been brought in by Marcus and Vivian found out what they'd actually funded. 2 of them filed their own suits. Marcus and Vivian, married for exactly 5 months, filed for divorce in February. I heard it from my mother, who heard it from a woman at her church, whose niece worked the front desk at Vivian's old hotel. I didn't feel sorry for either of them. I want to be honest about that. I also didn't feel triumphant, not really. Mostly I felt tired, and then, slowly, over a few months, something that started to feel like relief. Patricia called me once, about 4 months after everything came out. Tuesday night, around 9. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up because I wanted to hear what she'd say. "I didn't know about the money," she said. "I want you to know that." I was quiet for a second. "Patricia," I said, "with respect, that isn't actually the thing you owe me an apology for." She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she hung up. Caleb, the 7-year-old from the anaphylaxis call, came back to the station about 2 months after the wedding with his mom, holding a card his class had made, a crayon drawing of an ambulance with a smiley face on the front bumper. His mother held both my hands and couldn't get a full sentence out without her voice catching. I think about that card more than I think about the ballroom. I moved out of the place in Erin Mills. Marcus kept it, which was fine. I never wanted to see that kitchen again. I found a 1-bedroom near the Cooksville GO station with decent light and a landlord who actually answers his phone. I adopted a scruffy, middle-aged rescue dog from the Brampton shelter, a Beagle Shepherd mix named Otis, who has destroyed 2 pairs of work boots and is, somehow, completely worth it. I don't have some tidy conclusion about love or trust, or what it costs to be betrayed by the 2 people you'd chosen on purpose. What I have is this. I stayed on scene with 3 strangers on the side of the 401 on the worst morning of my life, and I'd make that same call again without a second of hesitation. And that fact tells me something true about who I actually am, something nobody in that ballroom could take with them when they left. Marcus used to imply gently that the job made me unavailable. Patricia said it outright. Even Vivian once, 2 glasses of wine into a dinner I'd shown up 40 minutes late for, said, "Sienna, sometimes it really feels like the ambulance is your real relationship." Maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. I just don't think it's the tragedy she meant it to be. Because on the morning of September 13th, when everything else came apart, I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what my hands were trained to do, and somewhere across the city, a 7-year-old boy got to go home to his mother. I'd make that trade every single time.